Hello and welcome everyone to this new video on Azure, and the topic for today is how to license Azure Backup Server. Now, talking to the community, I find that there's a lot of confusion in people how to properly license Azure Backup Server. Maybe they don't know the idea, and maybe it's a new concept for them, but hopefully by the end of this video you'll have a better understanding of how to license Azure Backup Server for your on-prem infrastructure. But before I get into that, let me just take a moment over here in explaining what are the different types of backup within Azure. So there are three kinds of basically. One is a file and folder backup. So these are for the files and folder which are static, which is not changing. And for this you deploy the agent on VM or physical machine where you want to protect and you do the backup. The second and the most popular one is the Azure Backup Server. Now along with this file and folder backup, it can be used to backup application and database. The database is just changing. It gives you application consistent backup such as backup of SQL, Exchange, Active Directory, SharePoint, all those things you can use it to backup by using Azure Backup Server. And the third option is the Data Protection Manager, and actually it is part of the System Center suite. So if you're using System Center Suite, Data Protection Manager is already part of that one. So there is not much difference between DPM as well as Azure Backup Server. I will highlight two major difference between the two is Data Protection Manager, you can use it to back up to the tape. With Azure Backup Server, you cannot do that. You can only back up this to the locally attached disk, and obviously you can copy that to the Azure Storage. And the other difference between Data Protection Manager as well as Azure Backup Server is that Data Protection Manager is part of the System Center suite. So Azure Backup Server, obviously you can buy that separately. But for this video, I will concentrate on Azure Backup Server, and I'll try to explain you with an example so that you have better understanding. So having said that, let me just flip over and let me just try to create a on-prem infrastructure. So I'm going to make an on-prem infrastructure. So say you have a physical server in your environment and it has SharePoint. And let me say you have a virtualized environment and you have a couple of VMs running. So you have your AD running on this, you have Exchange, and you have say SQL, and it is running on hypervisor. Okay, so the three things that you have to keep in mind when it comes to license the Azure Backup Server is you have to know how many instances are running on this, right? And you also need to know how much data you're trying to protect. So in my case, I have this physical server, which is one, then I have these three VMs, and then I also have the host. So in total, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 instances. So this is the number that I need to know. And the second thing that I need to know is how much data I am trying to protect. So say for example, in this environment, in total, I have 50 gig of data, right? This is the data on the SharePoint, Active Directory, Exchange, SQL, and the host. So I'm trying to protect 50 gig of data. So how the things are licensed in Azure Backup Server, I'll just take an example of the data. So for example, if you have 50 gig of data, so you have three categories. One is 0 to 50, which is license $6.08 monthly. And then you have 51 to 500, which is license $12.16. And then you have 500 incremental. So anything above 500, it will be incremental. So say if I have 700 gig of data, it's gonna be $24.32 because it's increment, right? And then if you have 1.5, then increment of $12.16. So this is the way you will license, and let me actually show you. So if I go to the Azure Calculator and under the Azure pricing, so say if I have one instance that I'm trying to protect, and if I have 1 gig of data on this one, so say how much is the amount which comes into this calculator is $6.08. Let me make it 50 gig in our example, right? So it's still 6.08, but if I make it 51, you see it will change to $12.16, because as I mentioned that you have three categories. So one, you need to know how many instances you are trying to protect, and secondly, you need to know how much data. So when we go from 50 to 51, it is in the category of 51 to 500, which is charged $12.16. Okay, so let me just show you. If I change this to 501, you see how much it comes out to, $24.32, because then it's incremental of $12.16. So this is the way you will license per instance. Now the other thing that you need to keep in mind is the Azure Storage. So actually let me show you. So basically, this was the thing on-prem, and I had my Azure backup server here, and I was backing up, all this by using Azure backup server, and I had this locally attached disk, and I was backing that up. Now, if I want to make a secondary copy, which is in the cloud, right? A lot of people, they do that, right? So I also need to pay for the storage in the Azure. It is not included, it is not free. So that's why, let me flip over to the Azure Calculator, and if I move this, you see there's an Azure Storage over here. Actually, let me make it simple. Let me just change it to 1 gig. Okay, and in storage you have two categories. One is GRS and one is LRS. The difference between the two is, with the LRS you will have 3 copies within one region. So as you can see that I have Canada Central. So if I choose the LRS storage within the Azure, I will have 3 copies, and the cost of that one is 0.04. So you see the total cost is coming to 6.08 plus 0.04, $6.11 for 1 gig of data for one instance, and that also includes the Azure storage if I want to make a secondary copy. But the question arises also, sometimes a lot of people, they ask, so if you're going with the Azure backup server, do I need to go with the Azure storage in the cloud? The answer is no. So if you want to just use the locally attached storage basically, and you want to do the backup, yes, you can do that too. Then you're not gonna count that Azure storage which is there in the calculator. But it is always recommended, because a lot of people, they want to, a lot of people, they do backup on the tape library, and the truck comes and it takes it offsite and vault it. So this is a great way of protecting it. And as you know that Azure give you a retention period of, I think it's 99 years. So it's a great tool, and the cost is not that much. So basically there are two categories within the Azure backup. One is the number of instances, depending upon how much data you're trying to protect, and obviously if you want to use the Azure storage, then you have to pay depending upon LRS. So this was for LRS. Now if I change it to GRS, so you see that there is a little bit difference, because with GRS you will have 2 copies. So basically it creates 6 copies, so 3 copies per region for redundancy. So that's why you see a little bit increase in the price for the storage in the Azure. So this was the way you will license your Azure backup server, and I hope this answered you a lot of questions and make things easy for you. Thanks for watching this video. Have a good day.